Welcome to episode 21 of the Thoughts with Lakshman podcast. My name is Lakshman Sybil. I'm a junior at the Edgemont Junior Senior High School. I've been studying German for probably a year and a half now, and I have also been working on German culture. This podcast, I have 20 other episodes of it already. This is episode 21. We've mainly focused so far specifically on German culture, different parts of it. We've looked at German history. We've looked at different periods in German history, World War One, World War Two. Um, we've also evaluated German immigration to the English colonies in the 18th and 19th centuries. So we have a mix of history, anthropology, and specific language related stuff. In this episode, and generally moving forward, I think I've really focused a lot on German stuff, and we're going to continue to do that, by the way. But I also want to expand into more broader topics that apply to many other nations across the world. And in this episode, we're really going to focus on immigration. And because remember, there are lots of different parts of anthropology, even though we don't really consider or we should actually. I think it is considered a pretty significant part, but different races, different groups of people, and how they interact is a crucial part of anthropology. And we haven't spent that much time on it so far. So and I was also reading some articles. I thought some of the stuff was pretty interesting. So I thought, why not discuss it in a podcast? Um, Obviously, immigration is considered a good thing. It gives the people opportunities. You have more diversity. You have more cultures that are mixing together, and that's one of the reasons that the United States is the strongest and most wealthiest country in the world. However, you know, there is a lot of anti-immigration feelings, and I wanted to take a look at that sort of stuff because I've never really focused on it. I've never really tried to understand exactly why people are, anti-immigrant. So today we're actually going to look at, main reasons why people are against immigration. And recently, there's a lot more anti-immigration sentiment across Europe, even the United States, and in England with Brexit. And I thought it would be interesting to look at. So, oh, and just one other thing, in case you're interested, this podcast it'll be uploaded to YouTube on the Thoughts with Lakshman channel. I also upload, by the way, German language YouTube videos. Those are interesting. If you're interested in learning the language, we started out really, really at a beginner level. So if you're interested in learning the language, I highly recommend you take a look. Um, and yeah, we have podcast on YouTube. The podcast is also available on Spotify. It's also available on Apple Podcasts. So basically everywhere, you want to listen to your podcast from. And I use the Anchor app, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in creating a podcast. It works really well. But let's just get straight in. So anti-immigration sentiment has really, really, feelings have really, really increased against immigrants recently. And that's because there's more immigration. And in the last 20 years, many more immigrants have immigrated to countries in Europe, and we're going to focus a lot, by the way, in Europe. We're also going to focus a little on the U.S. today, but mainly in Europe. Um, you know, some people in their countries, but it's important to also realize that even though people are anti-immigrant, basically everyone in many countries is an immigrant. It's just that they have been in their countries much longer than other people have. And nobody really talks about it enough, in my opinion. But for example, people in the U.S., everybody other than Native Americans, everyone's an immigrant. So that's just something you keep in mind because it's a little hypocritical because if people are immigrants themselves, just because they've come few, decades earlier, um, they're against other immigrants. National identity can be another thing. Immigrants may isolate themselves in their own communities. You know, they might form self-organized communities. For example, with German immigrants in the U.S., they were mainly living in Pennsylvania, and they lived in little close-knit, communities where they spoke German, and it was only German people. These little villages, and that's, by the way, with kindergarten. That's how the Americans found, or the colonists found out about kindergarten because they took their practices from Germany, they applied them to their new place, and then because they worked well, it spread and it helped out the entire, group of people living there. Um, you know, a lot of native people don't like the fact that immigrants don't always assimilate with their culture. And this is really like the crux of what I want to focus on because what does their culture even mean, right? Doesn't it enhance, their culture if there's more cultures in that culture? Or is their culture a distinct culture that belongs to them? And in their view, by having more immigrants that don't, you know, uh, assimilate into that culture, it diminishes that culture and it makes that culture weaker. So that's one way that people, I don't understand it, but that's one way that people do try and justify their anti-immigrant feelings. Um, but again, though, the fact remains that if Asian immigrants come to the United States, they're more likely to associate with Asians. If African immigrants come to the United States, they're more likely to associate with Africans. That's a fact. Now, is that because they don't feel as comfortable, associating with people that aren't, from where they are from? Or is it more of their lack of effort, to really assimilate? Um, Personally, I think they just feel more comfortable. I think that when people come to, for example, they know that, let's take African immigrants, for example. If an African immigrant comes to the United States and they associate mainly with Africans, you can't really fault that for diminishing the national culture or failing to assimilate. Instead, that person might feel more comfortable associating with people who have gone through what he's gone through or she's gone through. And I think that's probably the reason that that happens. I don't think it's a lack of effort to assimilate. Um, people like to say that, oh, they don't know the language. They're not going to be, you know, imp- active members of the community. Um, Again, you know, well, first off, like there is a whole thing on how, you know, Spanish isn't the national language of the U.S. Well, if people don't know English, I mean, they have every right to speak Spanish, and even if they do know English, they have every right to speak Spanish too. I, I disagree with that. People don't like it when, other languages are spoken, but across many countries in Europe, for example, in Switzerland, there is no national language. You've got German, Swiss German, you know, and there isn't in Austria. There are a lot of different, dialects of languages. There's not really a set in stone language, and people are, that's one thing, by the way, because Europe tends to be more anti-immigrant than the United States. Um, but Europe's actually, and I think probably more accepting for more languages, probably because, within their own people or native people, within the natives, they speak multiple languages. So it's not as if immigrants are speaking different languages than the native people, but the native people themselves are speaking different languages from each other. However, I think I don't think yeah, I just don't think that there has to be one language. I think people should be able to speak whatever they want to speak, whatever they feel most comfortable speaking. Um, and and also, by the way, learning another language, knowing a lot, like having more immigrants in the United States helps more Native Americans learn foreign languages too. And I think that's a positive too because it enhances their ability to communicate with other people, and that's always a positive. But those are some, things that people say. Obviously, you do have, and this is very interesting, by the way. A lot of people like to argue that, oh, with more immigrants, there's more competition. That means that my wages are going to go down, and it hurts me economically. But people have actually done a lot of research on this. And while, from a theoretical standpoint, that's true, right? I mean, if you have more people, if you have 10 people doing 10 jobs, those 10 people are going to get paid decently well. If you have 50 people doing those 10 jobs, prices those people are going to get paid less. That's true. The more people you have, but people have actually done research on, how do immigrants actually affect the economic situations of Americans. And what the researchers actually came up with, and by the way, the organization that did this was actually leans to the right. And what they found was that immigrants actually help everybody, and the study was in the U.S. So immigrants in the U.S. actually helped other Native Americans, not Native Americans, but other Americans who were there before them, economically. They help them economically because immigrants are much more likely to create their own business. They're much more likely to be entrepreneurs. They're more likely to just also work higher wage jobs. By the way, a lot of immigrants are. I mean, you have a combination, but in this study, they found the biggest thing that they focused on though was the fact that immigrants create businesses at a much higher rate. And those businesses do well. They provide private sector jobs for other Americans, and that's a good thing. At a basic level, you could, right, the economic competition is there, but generally speaking, over the long run, the more talented people you have in a country, the better it is for everybody. Because if one person succeeds, they're not succeeding by themselves. If they're succeeding, they're creating a business that's providing a good service for many people. So the consumers are benefiting from it, and also their employees. They're creating many high paying jobs, many opportunities for people to do well. So over the long run, the research from a right wing organization, not a right wing, but a lean right organization, says that immigration actually helps the economic situation for people. Some people don't like, they fear that there's going to be an overpopulation that with immigrants, and they think that there should be space between everybody, and I disagree with that. But some people don't like. I mean, look, overpopulation is a legitimate concern, um, but it's not as if um, we're at risk of, I don't think that's a. I think with the benefit, completely outweighs, that. Um, some people fear diseases with immigrants. Again, the scientific evidence just isn't there. I mean, look, in history, yes, because doctors were far less advanced, people could not really protect themselves against diseases. So, yes, you would be right to say that, you know, immigrants and diseases. I mean, take a look what happened to the Native Americans. When European immigrants came to the United to colonize America, they wiped out the immigrants with diseases because they were immune to diseases. Because over time, when people in their population become immune to those diseases, and once they came to interact with a different group of people that wasn't immune, um, they took them out. So someone could say this 200 years ago, but with the quality of healthcare that we have, especially in the United States, it has the best quality healthcare, not cheapest, but the best quality. Other countries around the world, these situations much more advanced. Immigrants aren't gonna, you're not gonna see that happening again. So that's also, not the strongest um, argument. Some people like to talk about how certain immigrants, and this is a legitimate concern, by the way, um, certain immigrants aren't actually, um, they don't have the country that they're immigrating to, they don't have that country's best interest in their mind. And this is true, by the way. You do have a lot of immigrants who've actually come to the United States to go to school, and maybe they've worked at NASA or something, and then they've gone back to their other countries and they've told that country, the technology that's been worked on, and then that country copies it. And that's happened, multiple times. So that's a legitimate reason, in my opinion, because that does actually happen. It doesn't happen very often, but it's interesting with how, because remember, the United States has by far the best universities in the world, and it's very interesting that how a lot of foreign students come in, which is beautiful. It's a great thing, but then they go back to their other countries after they get, an education from the U.S., which is also fine. But if you're going to get a job in the U.S., then you're going to steal information. Then people don't like that. But it just doesn't happen very often. And it has happened in the past, but it just doesn't happen often enough for that to be a legitimate reason because, that does not compare to the benefits. Um, people like to say with crime, but that's just false. Studies also say that immigrants are far less likely to commit crimes, and they commit crimes at lower rates than the native people in that region. So it's interesting. Um, People also just fundamentally don't like difference. They really like similarities. They really like being with, I don't know. I think it's a comfort. I think it really is a fascinating thing because when you evaluate the arguments, it doesn't seem like there's nothing really there that you can really say um, is very legitimate. Like that truly makes a lot of sense. There's not much there. So some people really believe that it's psychological, and it's psychological, and you know in people's minds, they just feel uncomfortable. And that's a very interesting thing, by the way, because it's very difficult for that to be, taken care of. It's very difficult to solve that. And, I think, I do think that there's something there because people are really passionate about this issue. I mean, and we're going to speak about this in the next podcast, episode 22. This one we focus more broadly on immigration. We're going to look at a few countries specifically in the next episode, and many different countries, by the way, many. And then the next one after that, we're going to look at Germany specifically. But it's interesting that I really believe, and I've done research on this, I've read some stuff. It's very difficult to really perform a study on this because people don't like to talk about it. You're gonna have some response bias, definitely, and that would make the statistical study, inaccurate. But I think I would not be surprised if, psychologically, people, the main reason that they're anti-immigrant is that they just feel uncomfortable. They just feel uncomfortable with immigrants, and people also like to have stereotypes. They like to make generalizations on people because of one instance, or one experience, that exists, but that's always going to exist, and it's tricky, but it's hard to really stop. But I think, yeah, because we looked at a lot of arguments that people made, and we dissected them, and there's not much there. And I think, yeah, I think psychologically people feel uncomfortable with difference, and I think that ultimately drives them to oppose it. But anyways, you should think about this topic. It's quite interesting. Um, you know, you can formulate your own theory as long as read, you become educated on the topic. You'll be able to make a very well-informed theory on it, and it's interesting because anybody could really, nobody can pinpoint exactly what it is. So that's why, you should come up with ideas and think about it. And that's why I like this topic, by the way, even though, the topic itself isn't good, like anti-immigration feelings, but generally I like topics where you can really, there's not one answer. You can really think about what's going on. But yeah, thank you for listening to the podcast. This is episode 21 of the Thoughts with Lakshman podcast. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. The next episode is going to be looking at different countries specifically. And we're going to look at many different countries specifically. We're going to see what's going on. I think that's going to be quite interesting. Then the episode after that, we're going to be looking at Germany. And we're going to look at, because in Germany right now, there is a rise of nationalism. There's a rise of nationalism. It's very interesting. So we're going to take a look at that. But yeah, I appreciate you listening to the podcast, and goodbye.